In the early 20th century, after the World War I, Europe was deeply affected by violence, political unrest, and crisis in ideas. People began questioning old beliefs and values, and this confusion extended into philosophy, science, and the arts. During this time, the German philosopher Husserl developed a way of thinking called phenomenology, which tried to find solid, unshakable truths. He believed that instead of trusting our everyday experiences, which might be illusions, we should focus on how things appear in our consciousness. Even if the world around us is uncertain, we can be sure of what we are experiencing inside our minds. This was the foundation of phenomenology, a method that studied not the outside world but how we perceive and understand it. Husserl wanted to make philosophy as science by going back to the very root of experience. Phenomenology focused on things as they appeared in the mind. Husserl called this the phenomenological reduction, which meant putting aside assumptions about the external world and looking only at what we find in consciousness. He argued that every experience has a structure. When we think or feel something, we are always thinking or feeling about something. This connection between the mind and the object is called intentionality. All consciousness is directed towards something, and in that way, the mind actively shapes our understanding of the world. Phenomenology was about finding universal truths, what Husserl called essences in our experiences. These essences are not just random feelings, but basic structures of consciousness that are the same for all people. Even though phenomenology might sound abstract, it was meant to be returned to real, solid experiences, not imaginary concepts. This idea influenced many areas of thought, including literary criticism. Some critics, like Russian formalists, took inspiration from Husserl by focusing not on what literature says, but how it says it. They argued that literature makes ordinary language strange, so we see the world in new ways. This idea was similar to Husserl's idea of focusing on perception itself. A group of critics called the Geneva School used phenomenology to analyze literature. They believed that when we read a literary work, we are seeing into the author's mind. The text becomes a reflection of the author's consciousness. They tried to find deep structures in the writing that reveal how the author experienced the world. This kind of analysis ignored the historical or social background of the work and focused only on what was inside the text. However, this method had its limits. It treated the author's mind as something we could know completely just by reading the text. It also saw language as a simple tool to express inner thoughts. But modern thinkers began to argue that language is not just a mirror of thoughts, it actually creates meaning. We do not have pure thoughts that we then express in language. Instead, our thoughts and experiences are shaped by the language we use. This was a major change in how people understood meaning. It showed that our understanding is not private or internal, but social and shaped by the world around us. One of Husserl's students, Martin Heidegger, broke away from his teacher's focus on the individual mind and instead looked at human existence as it is lived in the world. Heidegger argued that we are always already in the world, involved in practical activities with others and with objects. Our being is not separate from the world but tied to it. He called this human existence Dasein, meaning being there. Understanding comes not just from thinking but from living. Time, history, and language are all part of what it means to be human. Language is not just a tool we use, it is the space in which we live and understand the world. He believed that through language, the truth of the world reveals itself to us. Heidegger's focus on language led to a new way of thinking called hermeneutics, the study of interpretation. He argued that all understanding is historical. We are shaped by our past and we interpret the world through the traditions we inherit. His ideas were taken up by Gadamer, who wrote a major book called Truth and Method. Gadamer said that when we read a text from the past, we engage in a dialogue between our present understanding and the text. We bring our own expectations and assumptions, and these interact with meaning of the work. Understanding is not about discovering the author's original intention, but about finding meaning in the meeting between the past and the present. He believed that tradition helps us interpret texts and that our preconceptions are not always bad, they are necessary for understanding. Not everyone agreed with this. The American critic E.D. Hirsch argued that the meaning of a text is fixed by the author's intention. He made a distinction between meaning and significance. Meaning is what the author meant at the time of writing, and significance is what the work means to us now. Hirsch worried that if we allow meanings to change over time, then interpretation becomes completely subjective and there is no stable truth. He believed we must respect the author's intention and not let the readers impose their own meanings. However, this idea also assumes that we can know the author's intention even when the author is long dead or unclear. He treated meaning as something that exists before language, a kind of mental act that can be captured in words. Critics of this view argue that meaning is always tied to language and history and that we cannot separate it from how it is expressed. Gadamer saw things differently. He believed that interpretation is always shaped by history and culture. We understand text through our own historical situation, and this is not a meaning is not fixed forever. It evolves as new generations read and understand text in new ways. He talked about a fusion of horizons where the reader's world and the text world come together to create understanding. This does not mean anything goes, there are better and worse interpretations, but it means that meaning is never closed off. However, Gadamer's idea of tradition has been criticized for being too comfortable. He believed that history is a dialogue that always leads to deeper understanding, but others argue that history is also full of conflict, domination, and exclusion. Not all traditions are good, and not all histories are harmonious. Later thinkers developed reception theory, which focuses on the reader's role in creating meaning. Writers like Iser argued that literary texts are not complete by themselves. They need readers to make them come alive. Reading is an active process where the reader fills in gaps, makes connections, and builds meaning. The text offers suggestions, but it is the reader who turns those into a full experience. Each reader brings different expectations and background knowledge. These shape how the text is understood. Reading is a back and forth process where what we expect changes as we read, and new information changes how we see earlier parts of the text. Iser believed that the best literature challenges our assumptions. It makes us aware of the beliefs and ideas we take for granted and encourages us to see things differently. Reading becomes a way of learning about ourselves. However, I also believe that readers should make the text into a unified whole. He wanted interpretations to be consistent and meaningful. This suggests that even though reading is open ended, there are limits. The reader must bring the parts of the text together in a way that makes sense. Some critics argue that this is too restrictive and that literature often resists simple unities. Roland Barthes took a more radical view. In his book The Pleasure of the Text, Barthes argued that modern literature does not offer clear meanings. Instead, it plays with language and invites the reader to enjoy the experience of reading without needing everything to make sense. For Barthes, reading is not about understanding the author's intention or building a clear message. It is about delighting in the possibilities of language. This view treats reading as more personal, emotional, and even sensual. But critics have said this approach ignores the social and ethical context of reading. It can become a kind of luxury only available to certain privileged people. Reception theory also asks how readers are shaped by history. Hans Robert Joss argued that every work is received within a certain historical horizon or framework. This changes over time. A novel might have meant one thing in the 1800s and something very different today. The text itself is not fixed. It is shaped by how it is read at different times. A work of literature includes an image of the reader it expects. This implied reader is part of the work itself. Even when a writer is not thinking of a specific audience, the way they write includes certain assumptions about who is reading. Sartre's book, What is Literature, argues that the reader is essential to the literary work. A text is not complete without someone to read it. The writer writes for even if they do not know who that person is. Reading is part of the process of making literature. The reader brings the text to life by interpreting it. This means that literature is always a social activity connected to the world outside the text. Different readers at different times will find different things in the same work.